The Cardinals may have just put those road struggles behind them with a doubleheader sweep of the Reds on Wednesday. We'll talk about all the elements of the offensive outbursts and the strong pitching from the Redbirds coming up on B-Schaeff Daily. What's going on, everyone, and welcome into this edition of B-Schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer with you, talking about a Cardinals doubleheader sweep from Wednesday as the Redbirds took both games in the Twin Bill against Cincinnati, winning the first game 6-0 and game two by a score of 9-1. So I have a lot to break down on this edition of the show. Cardinal bats really got going in a major way in this one. You scored 15 runs in two games. That's obviously going to be the case. We'll talk about the main contributors, and we'll update you on whether or not Willson Contreras met the benchmark that I had predicted, maybe a week or two ago, that I thought he could reach before the end of April. Maybe didn't quite get there, but he did have some big contributions for the Cardinals on Wednesday, as did a number of others. Masyn Winn, Lars Nootbaar, Victor Scott II, and more. Talk about the offense. We'll also have to talk about the pitching, because when you win a doubleheader by a combined score of 15-1, means you were doing something right on the mound as well. Miles Mikolas and Steven Matz, the starters for the Cardinals on Wednesday. We have some really positive things to say about Graceffo and really the Cardinals bullpen as a whole, which, dating back to about a week ago, has quietly and suddenly all at once become a very potent force again, at least in the numbers that they've compiled over that span. We'll talk about some of the stats that may surprise you about the Cardinals and some of the aspects of the team that you might have been a little bit down on. You might not have thought very much of some of the stats we're going to give off, and yet they're real stats talking about a team that may be turning a corner and moving in the right direction. We'll see. Still a long way to go, of course, for the St. Louis Cardinals, but feels good to see that they were able to conquer the Reds on Wednesday, and they've got another one coming up on Thursday afternoon, a chance to go for a series win on the road and race back toward a 500 record. A win on Thursday would mean a 15-17 record for the Cardinals after just a few days ago. It seemed like they were certainly down and out. So that's going to be a big one. We'll talk about it and preview it just a bit before the end of this episode of the show, but want to make sure everybody locked in here and subscribed on the YouTube channel to the Brenden Schaeffer St. Louis Cardinals Writer channel. And if you'd like to listen to B-Schaeff Daily on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, would encourage you to follow over there. Rate and review the show if you enjoy Cardinals content all summer long. That's what we'll be providing here on B-Schaeff Daily. Let's talk about Game 1. Begin where it began, as the Cardinals got the win 6-0 over the Cincinnati Reds in the first game of the doubleheader. Miles Mikolas was on the mound, and that's an example of a guy that I know a lot of people probably don't have very high thoughts about relative to his performance the last couple of years and then the beginning of this season. Right, he had that awful day in Boston where he gave up 9 runs, 8 of them were earned, and the season stats have not looked good. Every time you glance at Miles Mikolas' ERA, or his record for that matter, you're not super encouraged. He came into this game, his 6th start of the season, with the Cardinals 0-5 in his previous outings, and the ERA was well above 5 for the young campaign. But Miles Mikolas was able to throw up zeros against the Cincinnati Reds, 5 1/3, no runs, no walks, only 3 hits allowed, and struck out 4, did Mikolas, through 5 1/3 good innings of baseball. He did need Kyle Leahy, which is also affectionately known on this show as Kyle Everyday He, Cardinal right-handed reliever, to come in and clean things up in the 6th inning. Again, I know it was only 77 pitches for Miles Mikolas, but folks, you saw him breaking down, and guess who else saw it? Oliver Marmol, and so he's aggressive. When Miles Mikolas gets that third time through the order, they want to be protective and proactive about taking him out of the game. I saw some commentary that said, he was only at 77 pitches. Why take him out? I think it's one of the most silly commentaries anybody can make about the 2025 Cardinals. The notion that Oli Marmol is taking starters out too early, I haven't seen it once. I really haven't. I just think the opposite is normally the way that you get yourself hurt in these situations, and the Cardinals have been very proactive in the way that they have handled their rotation. And so for folks who know the trends, who understand that Miles Mikolas has struggled the third time through a batting order, the Cardinals are trying to protect him from that. Does it mean that, he'll probably never be that 200-inning guy again in an MLB season? Yeah, that's what it means. But it also means that he can still be a productive member of the Cardinals rotation as is. And one of the stats that I'm going to give you that may surprise you, unless you saw me talking about it a little bit earlier today on Twitter, Miles Mikolas, if you remove the Boston start, which I understand you can't do, it definitely counts. And it was objectively horrible. It wasn't what you want for a starting pitcher in the big leagues. 2 2/3 innings, I believe it was. He didn't get out of the third. 9 runs, 8 earned. But it's impacting in a disproportionately significant way his season numbers. Because when Miles Mikolas has a 4.66 ERA on the season, his ERA, if you would take out that one day, which was objectively bad, but it was confined to a singular game, Miles Mikolas would have a 2.39 ERA in the other 5 starts that he's made. Not one of the 5 was a start in which the Cardinals didn't have a legitimate chance to win, thanks to Miles Mikolas and his contributions. Cardinals didn't win any of those games until Wednesday. That's true. But I do think it's time to take a step back and recognize that outside of what our narratives are about Miles Mikolas and the way that we feel about what his performances have been, the numbers say differently. A 4.66 ERA is nothing to write home about. But when you look at it and break it down in this way, to understand that he was solely responsible for a Cardinals loss in that game on Sunday night in Boston. He was the only guy on the team responsible that has to wear that one. And that's a hard thing because there's 26 guys on a baseball roster. There's a manager. There's a coaching staff. There's a lot of elements of a team sport that are at play here. But the guy that takes the ball and gives up 9 runs, ultimately that does fall on his shoulders. And that night it very much did for Miles Mikolas. The Cardinals lost because of him. But in the 5 other starts that he's made, I just don't understand at this point, and I understand it for a while because that Boston start was fresh in everybody's minds. But now that we're as far removed from it as we are, 3 weeks or so, maybe even a little bit more than that, and you think about the season that he's had and look at the numbers, 2.39 ERA across all of his other starts, and you might say, well, Brenden, it doesn't work for a guy to have every 6 starts be a complete clunker and cost the team a game. And, you know, if you bore that out over a season, you're basically saying that there are 5 games that the Cardinals are guaranteed to lose for Miles Mikolas if he keeps that trend up every 6 starts or so to get completely firebombed and lose. Yeah, that's not a trend that he could continue. For a while, though, it was 50% of his starts were completely bogus, right? And then it was, all right, 33%. Okay, only 25%. Now you're even lower than 20%. 5 out of 6 have been good, or at least acceptable to good, somewhere in that range. One of them was completely unacceptable and can't happen again. But as long as it doesn't happen again, Miles Mikolas is delivering on exactly what the Cardinals want from him and need from him. So you have to feel pretty good about that. Is it sustainable? We're going to find out because he's going to remain in this rotation. The Cardinals pitching rotation has not been the problem with this team. Mikolas goes 5 1/3, was great today. Steven Matz only gets through 4 in game 2, didn't allow any runs, but only goes 4 innings because of a little bit of inefficiency in the early going of that outing for him and the fact that he hasn't made a start in 2 weeks, and so he's going to be on a pitch count. Wasn't a problem, though. We'll talk about how Gordon Graceffo came in and did a marvelous job to help save the Cardinals bullpen and make this a game that, based on what the offense was able to do in the early innings of game 2, was that kind of easy riding coast to a victory that the Cardinals had been, I think, craving for a little bit of time over the last couple of weeks. But when it comes to Miles Mikolas, and I've seen people talking about guys like Graceffo, and we've had a lot of conversations about McGreevy, get these guys in the rotation. Okay, at whose expense? Because right now, I don't think there is a legitimate argument other than, well, it's a transition year, and so they should be throwing the young guys because this season's a lost cause and they're not going anywhere. It's fine if you feel that way, but I don't think the Cardinals need to manage the season that way, especially as they crawl back toward 500. And I was able to say before this episode of the show that it's still April. It's not anymore. It's the 1st of May, but still, it's early enough in the season that with the talent we see on the Cardinals offensively, displayed in a couple of games on Wednesday, it has not been consistent to this point in the season. We haven't seen it often enough, but if you start to see it, because there are guys like Victor Scott II contributing from the bottom of the order, there's guys like Masyn Winn who you move up in the lineup and he's able to do some damage. Lars Nootbaar, we've seen him from the leadoff spot be successful. Brendan Donovan, we know what he's capable of doing. Willson Contreras is on a heater right now, and you've still got guys like Nolan Arenado on this roster. Jordan Walker taking some really good swings today was encouraging to see. They got to get Gorman going. I'd like to see a guy like Alec Burleson get going a little bit more consistently as well, but it's also a challenge to find playing time for everybody and be able to support guys as they're looking to get things rolling. Burleson had an offer in the first game of the series today, started in that contest, and Nolan Gorman in the first game of the series was 0 for 2 with a couple of walks. Game 2 of the doubleheader, he was 0 for 3 with a walk, did score a run, but good to see him at least getting on base on occasion. But Burleson had another offer, so trying to figure out exactly the way that they're going to handle a guy like him, I think we've seen in past week or so, the answer to that has been, he's not going to play a great amount, and I think that still has to be the case. 259 average with a 602 OPS for a guy who's supposed to not be striking out very much, but we're seeing it more and more. He was 0 for 4 in that game 2 was Burleson and had a couple of Ks there, and he's not getting absolutely any power, and quite honestly, I think it would be a sensible idea to send him to Memphis for a little while to get him to potentially work some things out with his swing. I don't know what the benefit of that might be for him, but I don't think Alec Burleson is serving a ton of benefit right now as a temptation almost for Oliver Marmol to put into the lineup. It just doesn't feel like he's a guy where he's providing a whole lot for the Cardinals right now. And, Oliver Marmol is a big fan of Alec Burleson, and I have seen the light at times before, and after originally probably not considering him to be a bona fide everyday type of player for this Cardinal lineup over the past couple of years. And you go back and forth on that, and you look at the numbers, and you understand the benefit that he brings when he's seeing the ball well. Right now, I just don't think Alec Burleson is seeing the ball particularly well. So that would be maybe a spot that I would look at a little bit more closely, because I'm not sure that he's going to be able to find the upper levels of his game as a reserve player. And frankly, right now, he shouldn't be in the Cardinal lineup over some of the other options that I think it makes sense to give more regular playing time to. So we'll see what that ends up looking like. And by the way, as I go up and down this lineup and talk about largely what was a very positive day for the Cardinals offensively, you do have on the horizon Ivan Herrera set to return. He is supposed to begin a rehab assignment on Thursday. So today, as you're listening to this podcast, and he's going to DH in the minor league lineup, and then hopefully we'll see him catch a time or two over the weekend, and before you know it, he could be back for the St. Louis Cardinals. Joel Pozo has done a great job. Pedro Paja is doing a great job. He homered today as well in taking the bulk duties of the catcher position, but I think with Ivan Herrera available and hitting anything close to what he was doing before the injury, that could be a huge boost to the Cardinals lineup as well. So when I talk about the grand pictures of this season, kind of putting a bow on this conversation about the starting rotation for the moment, there's no room to be able to get guys like Graceffo or like McGreevy into the rotation at this moment unless you find a way to make a trade, make something happen. I don't think that's something that happens in the month of May, and I don't think that the Cardinals should just be kicking guys to the curb. Like, Eric Fetty had a bad start his last time out. We're going to see what he looks like again his next time out. And if it becomes a trend, it becomes more of a topic of conversation. Do you go for a trade of somebody, but it's hard to do that when you're not necessarily selling high on anybody, and across the league, teams aren't usually dialed into being ready for the trade market at this point in the calendar. Do you have to go to maybe something of a Phantom IL stint for somebody to try to find a way to get some other names in a rotation if you should see a trend where a guy's not performing? We'll wait and see, but to this point, the Cardinals really haven't had to deal with that. Like, yes, it's been one bad start for Eric Fetty. He also had a bad start in Boston. Outside of that, he's done a nice enough job. Maybe the underlying numbers aren't as encouraging to where you can anticipate potentially some more trouble being on the horizon for him, but we're going to see that as it comes. I just think with where the Cardinals are at right now, they're close enough to, I'm going to call it contention, but really it's just close enough to 500 to be able to continue on the path that they are on, stick with this six-man rotation for another week or so. Steven Matz should at least get one more start, and then you'll figure out what that looks like when the off days on Thursdays return to us in a consistent fashion. But for as much as there was a time in the offseason or in spring training or even earlier this season where you would have said, the Cardinals need to have that short leash with Miles Mikolas, that's fine if that's the kind of leash that you think he should have, and I was in agreement of that. But look at the performances. There's no leash to be discussed right now. Miles Mikolas is a bona fide member of this rotation in the way that he is performing. Once again, the stats are the stats. A 2.39 ERA outside of a miserable, awful, single-handedly cost the Cardinals a game in Boston start. And that happened, and you can't excuse it and ignore it. It's something that you keep an eye out for and make sure it doesn't happen again. But when you tell me, all right, he's your number 5 starter and he's giving you a chance to win 5 out of 6 of the times he's pitched and hasn't been his fault when they've lost, right? You're talking about 4 2/3, not very deep into the game because they're protecting him from the third time through, but only giving up 2 runs in that instance. Or he goes 5 innings and gives up a run, or he goes 5 innings and gives up 3 runs. varying degrees of excellence in those starts. And, a lot of them fall more toward the category of just solid, mediocre, average, regular, passable, whatever word you want to use to describe it. It's not like we're over the moon about the guy, but when the numbers are the numbers and it's a 2.39 ERA outside of one start, it's not like I'm excusing a whole lot of different things or I have to bend over backwards to be able to see the light of, all right, I can squint and kind of see Miles Mikolas as a productive member of the rotation. No, I just think he has been outside of one really bad game. Like, was it any different than if he had given up 6 runs that day instead of 8 or 9? The Cardinals lost that game 18-7. I don't think it was going to be their day. By the way, Gordon Graceffo got lit up in that game too. Nobody's talking about the Boston game for Gordon Graceffo after the great 5 innings that he threw tonight. So I just think it's fair to contextualize and to kind of keep in mind the all the information, right? Everything that is at play. We like the statistics, but we also should be willing to lean on them when they're telling us something different than what our narrative says about a given player, right? I thought the leash should be short for Miles Mikolas coming into the season. I thought maybe he was 1 start away from being ushered out of this rotation, but he has righted the ship to this point, and it's been beneficial to the Cardinals. They certainly got a win in part because of him on Wednesday, his first victory of 2025. And we'll get to Steven Matz in the context of his performance in Game 2 and what we think about his future prospects for the rotation or what his role could end up being, because I think he is kind of in a tight spot, and I don't know how much he can possibly do to be able to change the Cardinals' outlook and their viewpoint on the things that the Cardinals may need to do with this player. But I want to make sure we wrap things up in talking about Game 1 because there are a couple of other topics from an offensive perspective and then an Ollie Marmol perspective that I think we need to talk about. A pretty smooth ejection, or at least what he did after he was ejected by the home plate umpire in Game 1 on Wednesday. Masyn Winn, how about a 2-home-run game from him? Had one in the first inning to get things going. Oliver Marmol moving him up into the 2 spot in the lineup. I think there's some merit to it. I think it's also sort of a trial run that you'd rather get a look at it now before Ivan Herrera comes back, because ultimately I do think somebody like Willson Contreras is better served in an RBI position of your lineup, and that could be in the number 5 spot. It could also be in the number 4 spot, right? Like if Willson Contreras, I know his season-long numbers are paling in comparison right now to Nolan Arenado, but you could potentially make the argument that Nolan Arenado is a little bit on the downturn right now. I believe just maybe 4 hits over his past 8 games, 7 games, something to that effect. The OPS is down to 747. Look, if Arenado is playing and hitting offensively the way that he was in the early portion of April, then you look at it differently and say he's locked into the cleanup spot the whole way through. I wouldn't mind flipping those 2 guys, though, if you find the cleanup spot a little bit more valuable than the 5-hole and get a guy an extra at bat per game. I prefer that for Contreras right now, probably over Arenado, but it's a minor quibble. But when you look at that 2 spot, they had tried a lot of Willson Contreras in that spot. They had tried on rare occasions some other guys. Jordan Walker got a look there, and I think as it boils down to the return of Ivan Herrera, he's somebody that would profile pretty well for that spot. He had performed as basically the Cardinals' best hitter before he got hurt, and I think it would be interesting to consider him for that prominent spot in the batting order. But Masyn Winn, there's a lot to like about him as well in there, and he had a heck of a day. 2 for 3 with 2 home runs and 2 walks in Game 1 for Masyn Winn, basically single-handedly in a single game, raising his OPS from the 600s up to about 750. And then he had another pretty good game on the nightcap when he was right back in that 2-hole, goes 2 for 5 with a couple of runs scored. He did strike out a couple of times in Game 2, but his OPS, I think, went up maybe 100 points on the day. It's up to 770 now as we begin the month of May. Yep, that's pretty damn good, and you'll take that from Masyn Winn. That's higher than the OPS, certainly, that he had in the breakout season, really, that was his rookie campaign a year ago. So Masyn Winn provides a little bit of an extra speed element to that number 2 spot in the lineup. The Cardinals, as a batting order, need more power. They need more pop and the ability to leave the yard. But if Masyn Winn is not, an aspect of that where you're neglecting Masyn Winn to be in that spot and you're neglecting power to do it, because he's up to 4 home runs now on the season, and there's really only one guy, Lars Nootbaar, that's got more than that for the St. Louis Cardinals. I think it makes a lot of sense to have Masyn Winn under consideration for that spot, and you just think about if he's able to maintain that and lock that down, adds a little bit of a speed element, more excitement on the base paths up to the top of the order for the Cardinals. Right now they're going Nootbaar, Winn, Donovan. We'll see. Brenden Donovan's just plugging along okay, still hitting 333 as an 870 OPS for the season. I believe that is the highest OPS among Cardinal regulars until Herrera gets back. So you're feeling pretty good about him, I think, still in that spot. Willson Contreras in the nightcap goes 2 for 4, has a 3-run home run that really helps to set the pace for the Cardinals, so he's going to still be mixed in there. And then is it as simple as you go Ivan Herrera 6 if you leave Masyn Winn up in the 2-hole, and then you split the lefty Gorman, who it would most of the time be, into that 7 spot, with Jordan Walker batting 8th and Victor Scott the second batting 9th? Like, the depth that lineup could see could be very exciting once you get Herrera back in there. And so I think that's part of it, is like a trial run to see, all right, if we're going to try this with Masyn Winn, now it's the time to do it, because if it doesn't pan out, we don't like the look of it, which right now I would imagine that you do like the look of it. And I'm just realizing, I think I still had Masyn Winn on the injured list in one of my fantasy teams, which kind of pisses me off because he was fantastic today. But nevertheless, these are things that I think make sense to try out now while you don't have as many robust options for that spot. Because I'd been advocating for for Contreras to move down to the 5 spot in the order anyway. And if you wanted to leave him at number 2, I think there's plenty of justification for doing that at this point. But Masyn Winn, I think, is another guy that is worth considering. And we considered him a 2-home-run threat with what he was able to do as part of a big rally in the Cardinals' 9th inning in Game 1 against Alexis Diaz, who's pretty good as a lockdown closer for Cincinnati most of the time. But it certainly was not the case today, and his season numbers take a hit as a result. Gave up 5 earned runs in an inning of work, 4 hits and a walk, and 3 of those hits came on long balls as the Cardinals went back-to-back-to-back for the first time since May of 2023, when they did it against the Los Angeles Dodgers at Busch Stadium. I believe it was May the 18th. I looked this up earlier today. It was either the 16th or the 18th, but it was, if I'm remembering, Juan Yepes, Nolan Gorman, and then Paul DeYoung that did it against Los Angeles on a day that the Cardinals hit 7 homers in one game back in 2023. I'm sure there was a b-schaeff daily breaking all that down a couple of years ago. But it was great to see from the Cardinals, because what it meant in Game 1 is that with that 9th inning rally for a game that we've talked about finished 6-0, but was basically a 1-0 game on the strength of the Masyn Winn home run that he tallied in the first inning and carried the Cardinals all the way through the rest of that game until you got to the 9th. This would have been like a Helsley spot, right? Like, this would have been, I think he even started warming up, this would have been a spot where the Cardinals we're going to have to burn their closer in Game 1 of a doubleheader, with Game 2 looming, and a Game 4 of the series on Thursday, which is another afternoon game. And then you have to welcome the Mets into town when the Cardinals return home on Friday. So there's really no rest for the weary, and you'd like to be able to save as much of your prominent pitching, as you possibly can right now. So the Cardinals offensively, I think, did some really important things to be able to help the Cardinals this weekend when you get to that Mets series, and what your pitching plan could look like relative to what it might have had to be if you didn't have as many guys healthy and rested. Because of the Cardinals going back-to-back-to-back there in the 9th inning, it no longer was a safe scenario, and the Cardinals, I say the Cardinals because it wasn't technically Oliver Marmol at that point, but they were able to bring in Matt Swanson to cap off the Game 1 of the doubleheader, and use him instead of a guy like Ryan Helsley. They had used Jojo Romero. He looked good in an inning of work in Game 1. That's nice to see. After Leahy had wrapped up an inning and 2/3 of scoreless baseball and only had a walk against him, was able to get around some of the damage and the traffic that Miles Mikolas had left him with there when he departed the game in the 6th inning. Was nice to see. You didn't have to go to as many of your premium guys. Didn't have to use Phil Maton. Didn't have to use Phil Maton all day. Didn't have to end up using Ryan Helsley all day, because the Cardinals were able to ambush Chase Petty in Game 2. But it's relevant, man. It's relevant when the Cardinals are able to do these little things. Like, winning the game is one thing. Setting up the pitching plan in a more favorable way for the days ahead is another. And when you have a doubleheader, a lot of times that's just not an option. You just have to try to use whoever you can, whoever's up for it, to be able to get through some of those situations. But this couldn't have gone any better than the Cardinals could have planned, as they are able to get through these games on the strength of just counting it up here, 6 total pitchers for the 18 innings that they threw today. And that's with Steven Matz being on what I assume was a pretty hard pitch count cap of around 75 or 80 pitches, maybe at the absolute most, which is why, with a little bit of a less efficient outing than he had a couple of weeks ago in St. Louis on April the 16th when he made his first start, that's why Steven Matz only went 4 innings tonight, I'm sure. And a lot of people were kind of griping about that, too, from Game 2 and saying, well, he could have gotten the win if he gotten through 5 innings. Why wouldn't they let him do that? Definitely think the win stat is overrated when it comes to this situation. It's much more beneficial to make sure that Steven Matz is healthy, rested, and strong as he moves forward. And by the way, Gordon Graceffo ended up with his win, I believe his first as a big leaguer, because he was able to traverse the remainder of that game. And since he's the only other pitcher who pitched and the starter did not qualify by failing to get through 5 innings, it was Gordon Graceffo's win. So good for him to be able to put that on the books as well. But before we keep veering too far into Game 2 content, I want to make sure we talk about the athletic feat by Oliver Marmol from Game 1 when he leapt over the dugout railing after being ejected from the dugout by the home plate umpire, arguing balls and strikes. I'm not 100% clear that it was actually Ollie who was doing the arguing, but the home plate umpire, somebody in the Cardinal dugout, caught his ire, and he was doing some hand-waving and eventually tossed the manager of the Cardinals, who said, okay, I'm going to come out here and get my money's worth. The way he leapt over that dugout railing I thought was pretty impressive. Oliver Marmol, 38 years old. I had to look it up today because I was texting with a colleague and said, I could do that. I could leap the railing. That's nothing. But then I said, well, it is fair. I'm younger than Oliver Marmol, but he's definitely in better shape than I'm in. And he's only 8 years older than me, almost to the day. Ollie is a July 2nd birthday. I'm a July 1st birthday. Had to look that up. I'll make sure to wish him happy birthday this year. And 8 years older than me. But I think I could do it. I think I could get over that dugout railing. I wouldn't look nearly as smooth as he did, though, making that happen. And a lot of content and commentary on Twitter about the fact that Oliver Marmol was ejected from the game. And talking about how the Cardinals' win percentage must be damn near 100% when Ollie gets ejected, right? And the jokes, they write themselves. People say, well, that's because they play better when he's not in the dugout. I think it would be the opposite of that. I think you would say that a manager trying to get, the defense of his team come to their aid and say, hey, these calls are bogus, going to yell at you about them, and maybe it'll help you fix your ways, Blue. I think that is an internationally understood, historically significant, hey, good thing for the team that gets the manager ejected. A lot of times that can be a vibe shifter for a team. The Cardinals were already ahead in this game when it happened in the 8th inning to Oliver Marmol. I believe it was during a Masyn Winn at-bat, if I'm recalling correctly, and he did end up walking in the at-bat anyway, and then later tried to steal second base. I thought he made it in there. I thought the beak had hit the bag. But the replay review decided that Masyn Winn was out on that stolen base attempt, probably just to get maybe some punitive revenge against Ollie Marmol for arguing balls and strikes, which may not have even been him in the first place at first. Anyway, it was a little bit strange, and I thought the Cardinals maybe got hosed on that whole deal just a little bit. But Ollie made sure to get the foot on the concrete to launch himself over the dugout railing. I thought he stuck the landing 10 out of 10 and made it look smooth. The thing of it is, I can claim that I could do the dugout railing leap, but I think it actually takes a lot more guts to do it in the situation that Ollie Marmol did it. Even if we set it up and everybody said, all right, Brendan's talking a big game, let's let him try to jump over the railing, and everybody would be watching, right? And I would get the pressure. I would feel the heat. Well, Ollie Marmol did it on TV, knowing that he's a manager of the St. Louis Cardinals, one of the 30 MLB franchises, and if he's not successful, boy, that's going to look bad. First of all, you can't exactly go out there and argue to the umpire that he's not doing his job if you just face planted after doing a leap over the dugout railing to try to get onto the field a little bit more quickly. That's going to be embarrassing, and suddenly you've lost all your leverage, and the cool factor is completely gone as well. But also the fact that you're on TV and it's going to be on SportsCenter, it would be everywhere if you slipped and fell. I don't think it was in his mind at all. It wasn't that tall of a railing, and I bet he's jumped over hundreds of dugout railings throughout his career. I also kind of wonder, is it the case that you'd have to go to each ballpark and just measure, make sure, okay, this is what this kind of feels like? Because I'll tell you what, you can jump one dugout railing, but if the next one's not the same height, you might end up in the situation that I was in after we took the carpeting off of our stairs at our house, and we still got the baby gate at the top of the stairs, even though my son pretty much would be the one to close it for us if we had forgotten, and he can certainly walk up and down the stairs now with a little bit of supervision. Probably should still keep an eye on him, but the gate stays there because it's just nice to know he can't open the thing, and so that's just a little bit of a safety situation. But when I'm talking about the stairs, the carpeting is there, and you feel what it feels like on your feet, and you can leap over as you're jumping up the stairs, as one may do. You kind of leap over and take those last two steps in one bound, in one fell swoop. And it's no problem, right? You might be in the middle of the night, might be dark, might not be able to see too well, but you kind of know where everything's situated. But then when we take the carpeting off of our stairs, and now it's just the hardwood on the stairs, you try that same thing and you trip and fall like I did at one point because I mismeasured the height. So my point is, if it's a different height of the dugout railing, I wonder if he has to do that in each and every stadium or if it's just so easy because he's more athletic than I am that it's not a problem at all. These are the things that I wonder when watching the Cardinals in Game 1. But great work by Oliver Marmol, 10 out of 10 on the leap over the dugout railing. And look, you can make the jokes about, well, he got ejected. That's why the Cardinals started doing good. I don't know about that. Credit the hitters, though, for being able to rattle off back-to-back-to-back in the ninth inning, which did go. Victor Scott the second, huge swing, 3-run home run. And then you had Lars Nootbaar hitting one himself, taking the lead away from Ivan Herrera for the team lead this season. That's right. Ivan Herrera and Lars Nootbaar were still tied. And then Masyn Winn, a moment later, hitting his second home run of the game, which I believe I had previously described as his fourth home run of the season, only his third home run of the season. I mixed up the stats on that. But so he's one behind Herrera, and Lars Nootbaar one ahead of Herrera now with 5. It'll be interesting to see like who leads the Cardinals in home runs this season, and what does that number end up being? Just 5 at this point for Nootbaar. Like, he could deke out 30. That's possible. We're basically a little bit more than a month through the season, and if you multiply that by 6, 5 times 6 is 30. Like, there's a route to it. It's more likely that he'll end up in the mid-20s if I had to guess, but that would still be a pretty productive season, especially we're talking about a leadoff hitter with the type of power that Lars Nootbaar is displaying so far. They're, 31 games into the season, so maybe more accurate to multiply that by about 5 and get to 23, 24, maybe 25 home runs is a little bit more of an apt comparison for where he is. But we do know it's been a bit of a power outage for the Cardinals until Wednesday's doubleheader, so we'll see if that's something that they can find a way to sustain and get a little bit more consistency in the power department. All right, so we talked about the benefit of the Cardinals going through that power surge in the ninth so that it could be Matt Swanson instead of Ryan Helsley in Game 1. Something similar happens in Game 2 where the Cardinals are able to bombard Chase Petty in the early moments of that game. He makes his major league debut for the Reds, and it did not go well. I think he's got a 34.7 ERA because he gave up a bunch of runs today as the Cardinals scored 3 in the first on a Willson Contreras home run, 1 run in the second, and then it is a 5-run third for the St. Louis Cardinals, who end up with a pretty productive beginning to this game offensively. I think thereafter they had 20 to maybe 23 hitters retired consecutively by the Reds pitching, which is maybe one of those things. I was asked about it on Twitter where you're like, is that a concern that suddenly happened? And I said, not really, because they do play a day game on Thursday. They were in Game 2 of a doubleheader. They were up 9-0. Is the philosophy at the plate that at that point not just to don't purposely do bad, but just anything that's in the zone, you swing at it, you try to put it in play, and you kind of move this thing along? I think it's to the benefit of the Cardinals to get a good night's sleep, more so than anything, once they're up 9-0. The game's over. I told my wife, the game's over in the third inning. She's like, are you sure you want to say that? That's kind of risky to mention. I'm like, no, I think the game's over. And it was. There was just, you're going through the motions at that point in a good way because there's really not a lot else to do. But it is kind of crazy that the Reds set down it was 20 at one point, and then it may have continued from there, consecutive Cardinal batters. A little bit strange to think about a 9-1 win having that characteristic, but I didn't really see a problem with it because I think it was relative to the time and situation of the game that the Cardinals were comfortable taking those kinds of swings and just kind of moving things along in the way that they did. We saw some good swings from Jordan Walker, one in particular when he had a 2-run double that helped build the Cardinals' lead. I mentioned Pedro Paez had a home run in Game 2. Victor Scott with a base hit. Donovan was 1 for 4 with an RBI as well. And we talked about Contreras. He goes 2 for 4, scores that 3-run homer, scored another run as well, and gets the OPS up to 642. So he's not at a 700 OPS like I said he was going to be, but he's getting closer and closer by the day. And he had another ball that was hit to the wall, basically, caught on the warning track. If that one gets out, he'd be probably 670, 675 OPS. He'd be even closer to that 700 mark. So we'll see how many days I missed it by, but I'll tell you, he's going to be above 700 by the time the season's over, and I would still probably take the over on 799.5. I think he could still relatively easily end up with an 800 OPS with the way that he has been swinging the bat recently. Really has been producing for the Cardinals as he has come out of the slump in a major way. I think you're going to continue to see more of the same there from Contreras. He did get the hit streak snapped, however, because he only went, he was 0 for 2 in Game 1. Scored a run, though. I think he might have reached on a fielder's choice or a couple of different ways that made it so he had fewer at-bats. But nevertheless, did snap the hit streak, still in a really good spot offensively with the way that he has been playing recently. But it's relevant because the Cardinals can get up 9-0 and everybody can be feeling really good about things. And there are a lot of times it seems like when that happens, that type of game is unfolding. The Cardinals will maybe win it 10-7. And you go, why did they have to make this more interesting than it needed to be? Because what happens when you make it interesting is like, okay, Maton probably has to pitch. And maybe even Ryan Helsley has to pitch. And you might have to go to some middle relievers as well. They had Gordon Graceffo available as the 27th man for the doubleheader, and they used him, and they used him appropriately, and he answered the bell. Steven Matz, we talked about, a little less efficient in this one, but he goes 4, gives up no runs. He had 6 strikeouts. The stuff looks really good. We'll talk about his starting prospects moving forward. It was 73 pitches for Steven Matz in this one, 5 hits allowed. He was great. Graceffo comes in for the 5th, and at that point, you're up 9-0. You have to be thinking Graceffo's the last pitcher that you're going to go to in this game. Find a way to get through it. You get probably 80, 90 pitches to do so. Make sure this doesn't get interesting, and the Cardinals are able to really not only enjoy the benefits of the 9-run outburst, but also not have to use up any of their relievers in a game that, like, you got to have some of those to save your bullpen from time to time throughout a season. Those do pay dividends. And when you can do it in the second game of a doubleheader, and you can use the guy that was brought up specifically because he was going to be able to give you length out of the bullpen in Graceffo, and he's the 27th man for the doubleheader, perfection. 5 innings, 2 hits allowed, just 1 run, and 5 strikeouts for Gordon Graceffo. Didn't walk a batter. He looked electric. He was hitting 99 on the radar gun on a number of occasions. 98, 99 was what we were seeing for the fastball of Gordon Graceffo. That's going to play, man. That was really impressive stuff to see. Just a night and day difference from the way that we saw him pitching in Boston when he was up the last time as a 27th man for a doubleheader. Yes, Gordon Graceffo, it'll be great if and when the Cardinals are able to find a way to get him into the rotation later on this season. You're excited to see more of what he could be, because I very much think he's in play for the 2026 rotation. He's got to be, because the Cardinals are going to be under the understanding that Matz isn't going to be here, Mikolas isn't going to be here, Fetty's not going to be here, and it's very possible Sonny Gray isn't here. And so you could have to get used to the idea of a rotation filled with guys like Andre Palante, Matthew Liberatore, Michael McGreevy, Gordon Graceffo, Kyle Leahy. Like, that could legit be your rotation next year if the Cardinals have a lesser season here, lose 85 to 90 games. Maybe they're sellers at the deadline, and they start to introduce some of those cast and crew in August and September into some of the roles that they could be vying for heading into 2026. You could have a rotation that looks like that, and then maybe the likes of Tink Hence, Quinn Matthews, Cooper Jerpy comes back from Tommy John. You start to integrate some of those guys as 2026 goes along. Maybe that's a possibility. Does that team win a bunch of games? Probably not, but if that's the way the Cardinals feel they need to approach it for one more year to kind of build things up, and they maybe make some trades of a couple of other veterans to be able to stockpile some prospects, and you get that 5th pick in the 2025 draft, and maybe it's, earmarked for 2027 to really load things up in terms of foundation for 26, and then you can start adding free agents in the following year. I don't know if that's the way Chaim Bloom's going to do it. We're just talking out loud. My point is, right now, the rotation is not the problem for the Cardinals. When you've got 6 starters and you can't legitimately say statistically which one should be bumped from the rotation when the time comes in a week, that just means that a guy like Graceffo's the odd man out right now, but don't think he didn't make an impression on Wednesday. Throwing upper 90s gas and being able to post the way that the Cardinals really needed him to. He's built up like a starter, and he looked like one today. He did a great job. But, considering the Cardinals already have bigger fish to fry, and figuring out where Steven Matz in his 1.50 ERA, which has been even better in a rotation role. I think he just gave up the 1 run in 5 innings a couple of weeks ago, and 4 innings today of scoreless baseball. That's 9 innings and 1 run across his 2 starts, and he's been able to get strikeouts. He's looked really, really good. That's a guy that I think should remain in the rotation. I don't know how you do it, whether it's a Phantom IL stint, whatever it is. You're not going to need a 6-man rotation beyond a week from now. So because of the schedule, it lightens up with a bunch of Thursday off days coming up. So I'll be curious, just like the rest of y'all, to see what the Cardinals decide to do with Steven Matz. But if I had my vote, it would be to keep him in the rotation. You find a way, some way, somehow. You move somebody else to the bullpen. Like, you're not married to Eric Fetty having to be in the rotation. I believe he's done that before where he's had to kind of go into that dual role. Maybe he's a long reliever for a while if his next start doesn't look as good. You do kind of appreciate the value of Steven Matz in a bullpen role because when your other lefties, John King and Jojo Romero, were struggling there for a bit, it was very much a luxury to have a guy like Matz be able to come in and get lefties out as sort of a third lefty out of that group. But I also think the Cardinals can get more benefit out of him being in the rotation. So it might come down to a question of right now, like I know we thought Fedde was sort of the number 2 starter. Let's see what his next start looks like. And I don't know if it's on the Cardinals' radar to consider moving him out of the rotation in favor of Matz, but it'd be on mine because in a year where you're talking about development, neither of these guys have contracts. So neither of these guys are in that category of players that need to be developed. I think you go with the guys that give you the best chance. And if they can dig deep into the numbers and into what they're seeing from these two, and after one more week, when that decision, I think they'll be able to delay it for one more week because they don't have an off day until the following Thursday. If that's the way that they're going to look at it, I think they should. May the best man win would be the way that I would approach it. If there's no implications on contract or otherwise, yeah, let's see what Erick Fedde looks like his next time out. And they may have to have some consideration for having him be the guy that bumps to the bullpen in sort of a long relief role and seeing what Steven Matz is available. Because I'll tell you what, I think you get more out of Steven Matz at the trade deadline than you do Erick Fedde in terms of letting both of those guys go and seeing where the chips fall. I'd put my money right now on Steven Matz having a better, May, June, July than I necessarily would Erick Fedde. And a left-hander is always an attractive commodity when you get to the trade deadline. That, of course, is all under the assumption that the Cardinals are not a big-time contender when they get to July, which could be a complete, misappropriation of the way I'm speaking about this team. But if we do think in those terms, Matz could actually be somebody that recoups a lot more trade value than you think. It's not to say that Erick Fedde couldn't either, but the Cardinals didn't trade Erick Fedde during the spring, and I was an advocate for them keeping him. Part of that, though, was because I didn't really get the sense that there was a ton of value being offered toward the St. Louis Cardinals for Erick Fedde. So if you're not getting valuable offers from the rest of the league, try to kick the can down the road and see if that may come during a different month when you're a little bit closer to the deadline and therefore forcing a little bit of action upon the teams that may have interest in the player. So those are kind of my thoughts. I don't have a perfect answer for what's going to become of Steven Matz, but was really nice to see Steven Matz and Graceffo get through this game and not turn it into a slugfest where, the Cardinals may end up winning it still, but what was the cost where they give up, 6 or 8 runs and they have to find a way through the rest of that game using some of their premium relievers. Didn't happen, so Thursday should be wheels up. I know that you've got a big series coming up on Friday when the Mets come to town, but it's definitely going to be beneficial to have some of those guys available for the game on Thursday. That's really what I have to say about the doubleheader. I want to make sure before we get out of here, though, to go down on the farm. It's time to go down on the farm. Brought to you by Hastings Layers Premium Eggs.
You'll be happier than a jackass eating thistle.
Huh? Let's go ahead and start in Double-A here as the Springfield Cardinals took the loss on Wednesday 6-2 to the Northwest Arkansas Naturals. Eshawn Henderson was on the mound. We've seen some good things from him this season. Not as strong of an outing today, though. 4 innings pitched, 3 runs allowed, all earned, 7 hits, 2 walks, 4 strikeouts for Eshawn Henderson, who falls to 2-1 on the season, but still with that 2.79 ERA. Would be interested to see if some of those guys from Memphis eventually do get bumped up to the major leagues. What does things look like for Henderson? Does he end up getting to move up to Memphis at some point this summer? Could be interesting to follow that storyline. And, of course, another storyline that people are always excited to hear about is J.J. Weatherholt, but we're not seeing the big things from him at the moment. 845 is the OPS with a 309 average after an 0-for-4 with a strikeout day on Wednesday. Chase Davis, we'll start talking about him a little bit more. He could be somebody with an eye on trying to make it to Memphis himself. 1-for-2, also reached base via walk, and he's sitting at a 799 OPS. Jeremy Rivas is a shortstop that folks are excited about as well at the Double-A level with an 852 OPS. He was 0-for-2 today, reached base via walk as well. And, of course, it was a loss 6-2 for the Springfield Cardinals. The Memphis Redbirds fared better against the Louisville Bats. 10-6 winners, improving to 17-10 on the season. They're off to a good start in first place in the International League Western Division are the Memphis Redbirds. Michael Ciani starting to catch fire at the plate a little bit. Had a nice day yesterday, as I recall it. And he goes 2-for-4 with a couple of runs scored and a couple of RBIs as he hits his first home run on the season, finding a little bit of a power surge there for Michael Ciani. Cesar Prieto, 3-for-4. He had a nice day as well. with a couple of runs scored and a couple of RBIs. Reached base via walk too, so Prieto on base 4 times. He's got a 291 average and an 851 OPS. Be curious if the Cardinals give him a cup of coffee at some point in the big leagues this season. Obviously, guys like Cincy going to take precedent when it comes to getting regular playing time. Obviously, right now, you've got Jose Barrero on the big league roster as somebody who provides you a little bit of cover at shortstop and outfield, which makes him inherently more valuable than Prieto. But Prieto does have a hit tool that I think could be interesting and probably is better than that of Barrero, but we'll see. Time's going to tell on that. Of course, you still have Fermin. Like, the entire Memphis roster right now is being filled by, seems like, these guys that are kind of considered in that quadruple A bucket where, not necessarily going to be mainstays at the big league level, but you could still see the Cardinals hanging on to them for a reason, evidently. 3 for 5, though, Dave, for Fermin. He was good, and he's got an OPS of 786, so continuing to pitch pretty well at that level. It's kind of a bullpen day for the Redbirds, and not a lot to write home from their pitching, but Mosqueda, a relief pitcher who you could see at some point in time. He's an older veteran, journeyman reliever, couple of innings of scoreless baseball to lower his ERA to 2.77. Was the only Memphis pitcher not to give up any runs, and so he was credited with the win in a 3-1, improving his record to 3-1, I should say. 5 runs scored by the Redbirds there in the bottom of the ninth. I believe that must have been a walk-off grand slam then by somebody, because there's no reason to have scored 5 runs if it wasn't that. So I believe it was Lloyd who hit the walk-off grand slam. Matt Lloyd, 29-year-old, listed as an outfielder, ends up with the big swing there for the Memphis Redbirds. I wonder if I'm able to, because I was obviously locked in on all the Cardinals and the Blues action today, more so than anything, so I was not locked in on what was going on with the Memphis Redbirds, but I'm seeing the GIF now, the video, I should say, swinging in the rain, and Matt Lloyd called game, a grand slam for the left-handed swinging batter. Exciting stuff there for the Memphis Redbirds, 10-6. I'd love to make it down to Memphis, would love to make it down to Springfield. If we've got Cardinals fans who listen to the show who would recommend some restaurants and stuff for me in those towns, would love to find a way to do that this summer, but man, the schedule does stay busy. That, though, is down on the farm. We mentioned it for Ivan Herrera. Should see him and have some notes on him from Thursday night as we continue to go through here on B-Schaeff Daily and Down on the Farm. Thank you guys so much for listening, though. Excited to continue with everything that we're doing here at B-Schaeff Daily, covering the Cardinals all season long. Make sure to subscribe and consider a channel membership if you're interested in supporting the channel. That way, you can find the link below in the video description for that. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we will talk to you next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace!